hopefully. Hi everyone! So for this video, I am going to be making a Cinderella dress for a client. So the dress that I am making for my client is actually for her debut. It's her 18th birthday and her theme is Cinderella. So just to give you a little bit of background on how I came up with the design, I decided to incorporate the off-the-shoulder puff sleeves with butterflies on the dress and also the, I don't know what it's called, but the sides on the cartoon. And then another idea that I had was to actually make a Filipiniana, which is inspired of the puff sleeves of Cinderella's cartoon dress. So these were the materials that I used. I used silk for my base, tulle for my overlays, and then organza for the puff of the shoulder sleeves, shiny fabric for the sides. It has small bits of glitter on them, lightweight iron-on interfacing, and then boning for the structure of the corset, invisible zipper for enclosure, and this is the design that we went for. Laying the fabric on the floor is quite hard because there is so much fabric to work with, but you would want to fold it once to make a half circle skirt. So these were the measurements that I used. They have to be equal, but on the second half circle, you have to make the side with the fold longer to make a trail. So this is what she's looking right now. I had to move her at the wider space of the living room because they cannot handle her voluptuousness. So this is what it looks like at the back. It's not that long at the back because she also mentioned that although she wants a really popping gown, she also wants it to be a bit functional for her 18 roses so that when she walks she doesn't trip over the dress. And also personally I think that when you have a long trail, people usually step on it, so that's a big no-no, especially for me who made the dress. Like, how dare you step on what I've worked hard on? Do you know how delicate silk is? Huh? Because I'm done with the base of the skirt, doing this part makes me really inspired again. Like, it gives me more inspiration to actually see this. And so now I've done the base of the skirt. I'm gonna add the tulle or the second layer, and I'm gonna gather that. I have like about 5 meters of this. Okay, so I switched to my gathering foot. I also rethreaded my bobbin just so that I don't run out. I'm sure that I won't run out. When you're using gathering foot, you have to put the tension at the highest setting for me because I want it to be really gathered, and then I want the length of the stitches to be the highest one. There was a hole, so when I bought this fabric, they actually gave this part kind of like a freebie. Just ooh, look. rinse. Anyway, let me just cut that part out. This took a long time because there was so much fabric to gather and my thread keeps breaking at some point. So as you can see, the overlay is so much longer than the base, so I'm going to be cutting that off later, and here I am just trying to visualize what the top will look like. So the shiny fabric was too big, so I cut it in half and then folded it twice. So this is what I cut. And then I had to clean my sewing machine a little bit with a paintbrush because there's just so much dust in there and it wasn't working well. If you look closely, you can still see a darker shade of blue and my client wanted a lighter shade, so to make it lighter I decided to add more overlay. Hi, so this is where I am at the moment. So nothing is sewed together yet, they're just on top of each other, and I just put pins to secure them and just sew even this one's the folds. I'm gonna fix it. Like, even I am not that satisfied with that one yet, but just for me to visualize it and to get more inspired as I go on in making the dress. The skirt is layered. The base color is actually quite dark compared to the color that it has right now. So this is the fabric that I used for the bottom, and if I use that same fabric on the top, actually it's not that bad, but it stands out because it's the darkest shade of blue in the dress. So I thought of two ways I can fix that. First way is to layer it with tulle again. So if I layer it with tulle, it's gonna get lighter again. So it's gonna look like this. Oh, I don't really see it. Something like this. But I don't really like that the corset has a tulle overlay. I just think that it gets boring. So I am planning to buy a fabric that is of a lighter shade of blue. I actually have a dress that I feel like it's perfect with I made this dress as well, and this is such, like, I can see the shade of blue. Like, it is just a much better shade of blue. It complements everything together, and it shines differently from this one. It shines differently from the organza. It shines differently from the tulle. So it just adds more texture to it. So as I normally do in my other videos, I do a sample first, and I'm doing a sample from muslin here. Let me know if you want a tutorial on how I made my corset pattern off of the bodice foundation block that I did. So I just cut out the pieces and then face them right sides together and sew along the edges. I use 1 centimeter or 3/8 seam allowance. I pinned it on my mannequin, but there was a little bit of allowances there, and I was looking at the back and I didn't like the pointed detail it has at the center back, so I like it better this way. This was the time when I trimmed down the overlay to the desired length. This was 2 days after making the dress on the first day, because I had to have my client fit the bodice herself, and I've marked out where and how much I need to take in. After sewing it on the machine, I trimmed the edges, leaving a 1 centimeter seam allowance, and then using a seam ripper, I separated all the pieces. I gave them a press just so that they lay flat, and then I do my alterations on the paper pattern using a tracing wheel and my markers. Some pattern pieces I had to add more paper, and some I just had to cut. Once my pattern pieces were finalized, I went to my main fabric and started doing the same process. To add the interfacing, I just cut out a shape that is close to the pattern pieces and then gave it a press without the steam, and then I just trimmed the excess. My client texted me and she said she wants to make the dress more special and add more detail to it, so she wanted to have lace overlay on the bodice, and these were the choices. She ended up liking the white lace better. So here I am cutting the same pattern pieces out of the lace, but putting the blue base color underneath so that I can see what it will look like after I cut it. During this time I was conflicted because the lace and the shiny fabric on the skirt seemed to be clashing, but the more I look at it, the more that I like it, so we ended up doing as planned. So here I am just doing a basting stitch or a temporary stitch just to join the lace to the base fabric so it doesn't move around when I sew it under the machine. Do the same thing for the lining, except there will be no interfacing added onto it. Face the lining and the main fabric right sides together and make sure to align the seams on top and then sew across. Do an understitch so that the lining doesn't show through when worn. Here I am just snipping the curves just so that there is less tension and it will curve nicely when I flip it inside out. This is what the understitch looks like. I really didn't like the pointed look at the back, so I just cut that out. The next step is to sew in the boning. So if you look here, the boning is actually on a curve. I've pre-cutted it, and then I am just sewing it on one side of the seam allowance with a straight stitch and using a zipper foot just so that I can sew close to the edge. I just then finalize the boning lengths and just curve it more to make sure that it won't get in the way when I sew in at the bottom. Same with the top part, I am aligning the seams at the bottom and then sew straight across, and then here I am just doing snips at the bottom so that the tension would release and it would lay straight afterwards. I gave the bottom a press just to make sure that it lays flat and the lining wouldn't show through. Here I am just cutting a 1-inch strip of fabric that will be used as the loops for the lace detail at the back. I just sew it right sides together and then I turn it inside out, and this is what I had. For the actual lace, I used 2 inches of strip fabric. Here I'm just cutting out a rectangle from the tulle that will serve as a little bit of covering at the back. I sewed the top and the bottom right sides together, and this is what I got. I folded the edges of the bodice 1.5 centimeters, and then I pinned the loops, which are 7 centimeters long. Then I also inserted the tulle that I made to cover the back on the left side. Then here I'm just sewing it down with the top stitch. Moving on with the organza that I will be using for the off-the-shoulder puff sleeves. I firstly trimmed away these edges, and for the edges to not fray, I used fire to close them up. For the puff sleeves, there is no specific way that I did it. I just scrunched the fabric on where I think there needs to be gathering, and it was a trial and error, but I pinned them down first and then I sewed with a needle and thread. I also added an elastic strap just in case my client would like to wear it on her shoulders rather than on her arms, and so that the off the shoulder still hugs her arm without it being too baggy. Here I am just making the waistband for the skirt. I cut a 3 inches wide waistband. I also cut it from the interfacing just so that my waistband is more structured, and then I sewed the right sides together, and then here I just turned it inside out, and I am folding the bottom 1 centimeter in and gave it a press to prep it for when I sew the skirt on the waistband. Here I'm just hemming the bottom of the base skirt with a rolled hem foot. Then afterwards I gave it a press just so that they lay flatter. Here I am just pinning all of the skirt layers together so that when I base stitch or make a temporary stitch by hand, it will be easier to do so. This is how big the skirt was. And then I overlocked the top of the skirt just to reduce the bulk from all of the layers it has, so that when I sew it on the waistband, it will lay flat. So I first sewed the waistband to the skirt right sides together, and then afterwards I used the fold as a guide for when I sewed the invisible stitch by hand. There is no filter in this. Just look at how the light bounces off. So the original plan was to put the lace flower details at the bottom as well, the same with the picture she sent me, but I didn't feel like it looked good on the front because it was just being too much. So I proposed to her that the lace will be just at the back at the trail and it will go up. So I just made cutouts from the lace fabric and I just laid them on the trail, and once I was satisfied with how it looked like, I just pinned them first and then sewed a temporary stitch and then went to my sewing machine later on. Here's a picture of us at the party, and this is her, and I just want to thank her for trusting me. Please like and subscribe to my channel and hit that notification bell button so you get notified whenever I post something. Thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed it.